Tonight we have a couple of very distinguished guests as our speakers and presenters. Royal Skousen is a professor of linguistics and the English language at BYU, has been the editor of Book of Mormon Critical Text Project since 1988. In 2009, he published Yale University Press, the Book of Mormon, the earliest text. If you haven't looked at that, it's an amazing work. He also has done a multi-volume set analysis of the textual variants of the Book of Mormon that we have. I think we have a couple of sets of those. We have copies of this. Of course, most of you have come to hear specifically about this newest volume in the Joseph Smith Papers, which I'll get to in a moment. Royal has a PhD in linguistics from the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, and has taught at the University of Illinois, University of Texas, UC San Diego, and is a Fulbright lecturer, and has too many credits to his name to mention tonight, but a true scholar. And I actually don't know of anyone that knows more about the earliest texts of the Book of Mormon than Royal Skousen. So I feel very honored to have him with us tonight, and I think everyone here is lucky to hear from both of these gentlemen. Robin Jensen is the Associate Managing Historian and Project Archivist for the Joseph Smith Papers Project. He is one of the volume editors of volumes 1 and 2 of Revelations and Translations series in the Joseph Smith Papers. He specializes in document and transcription analysis. Sounds like he worked for the CIA, doesn't it? In 2005, he earned an MA in American History from BYU and earned a second MA in Library and Information Science. He is now pursuing a PhD in history at the University of Utah. How do they feel about that at BYU? They're okay? Yeah. Okay, they're okay with that. In my neighborhood, you don't dare put up any BYU symbols at all. But that's another story. Anyway, these two distinguished scholars have, and I want to put in just a really quick word for, if you haven't been buying or at least looking at reading the Joseph Smith Papers, this series is a tremendously important series and has sold literally tens of thousands of copies, which for most papers projects of important individuals, that's simply unheard of. And those who have edited other prominent individuals' papers have looked at the Joseph Smith Papers and are immeasurably impressed by what they've seen in terms of quality of the research, the writing, the editing, the actual design of the books, the quality of the bindings. Everything is just first rate. And I firmly believe, and I'm not the only one, that this project is going to have a tremendous impact on, and already has, on Mormon studies and on scholarship in the church, and making available information from our history that's never been done before. And so I commend everyone that's associated with the Joseph Smith Papers, and particularly happy tonight to have with us two very important people in this whole picture, and that's Royal Skousen and Robin Jensen. Will you please join with me in welcoming them?
Thank you, Kurt. That's a very kind introduction. It's good to see many of you, some familiar faces and many unfamiliar faces. We're pleased to be here tonight. I'm glad to talk about something that we are very passionate about. usually we don't have a willing audience to talk about some of these things, so it's great that you're a willing audience. So I want to spend just a very brief moment talking about the Joseph Smith Papers, and then I'm going to turn the time over to Professor Skousen. The Joseph Smith Papers, we've tried to make it as complicated for booksellers as possible. The Smith Papers are divided into 6 different series. Each of those series have volume numbers. So we, while this volume is actually our 11th volume published, it's the 3rd volume of the Revelation and Translation series. We have 5 other series. This is where I'm tested to make sure I get it right. So we have the Journal series, the History series, the Legal and Financial series, the Administrative series, and the Document series. Was someone ticking those off? Is that right? Is that 6 series? It should be 6 series. So, later this year, we're publishing the 3rd and final volume of the Journal series. In fact, that's going to press, I believe, at the end of this week. So that will be exciting. That, of course, covers up through June of 1844, when Joseph goes into Carthage. Next year, we've got several exciting volumes, and we are publishing 2 volumes per year. It's a daunting task, but we're excited to do it, and excited to see all the people that who suffer from insomnia be able to read it at night and fall asleep. So this is a tough crowd. So this is these are reference works, of course. This is not a novel. This is not something you sit down and read cover to cover. These, as Kurt mentioned, we hope that these volumes are used by scholars, used in their scholarly writings, so that they can better produce their scholarly writings. If our volumes are cited by other scholars, then we consider it a success. If they're in academic libraries, then we consider our work a success. So anyway, the way we're going to work tonight, Royal's going to talk first about the manuscript. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the history behind the manuscript, and then we will open it up for Q&A. So that way, if we get out late, it'll be you guys' fault and not ours. So with that, we'll turn it over to Royal.
Is that good enough? Okay. So, I'm going to talk, I think it's sort of loud. Down. Is that better? No?
No, better be the first one.
Really?
Yes.
It's echoing.
Oh, not here. But,
Oh yeah, well,
okay.
I'll
Depends on
answer
where you sit,
myself. Okay, well, I'm going to talk about the printer's manuscript and why this book is important and what it's valuable for. I am the editor of the Book of Mormon Critical Text Project. It's been going since 1988. And so the next slide will, what is important in this document? Well, it's color photographs of the entire manuscript. This has never occurred before. In fact, I don't think black and white either. But it's important that it's in color. And on the left side of each spread, you will see the actual photograph of the document. And then there is a facsimile transcript on the right. That is not particularly new. I published the transcripts in 2001. But these have been adjusted for the Dean Jesse system as revised by the Joseph Smith Papers. And so many of you may be familiar with that system of transcription, but they are essentially the same transcription. But you can now check the transcription. You can look at the pictures and see if it's accurate. Every transcription is an interpretation. This is it. You will interpret it. There are certain letters. You have to decide what the letters are. The printer's manuscript is important because it represents for us the earliest extant version of the Book of Mormon for 72% of the text. 28% of the text is extant in the original manuscript. but most of it was destroyed. Joseph Smith placed it in the cornerstone of the Nauvoo house, and over 40 years, mold got in, water, and just basically destroyed most of it. We have 28%, the church has 25 of the 28. And as part of the Joseph Smith papers, we are going to publish photographs of all of the fragments with the transcripts of the original manuscript. It's not a complete manuscript, but it is extremely important, and almost, I would say, the majority of really new things we've discovered about the Book of Mormon text has come from working with the original manuscript. But I want to talk about some of the things that we can learn from the printer's manuscript, especially since it's 72% of the earliest text. So, and I have a comment down there at the bottom that is just not, it's a copy of the original, but it's not just any old copy. I think that's really, now there's lots of copies, I have to say, we do have lots. Okay, the printer's manuscript was produced from August 1829 to January 1830. It took that long. They were preparing the manuscript as the printer needed copy. And it isn't something they sat down in August of 1829 and did it all. They did it as they needed to produce it. It turns out, though, that this printer's copy was designed so to not lose the text of the Book of Mormon. It's a copy. You keep the original back at the home, the house. You take the copy in, you set it from the copy. That was Joseph Smith's plan. It turns out, though, that only 5/6 of it was actually set from the printers. The 1/6, we'll talk about this, was actually set from the original manuscript. When we look at the printer's manuscript, we will see John Gilbert, the typesetter, putting punctuation marks, almost all of them in pencil. But only 1/3 of the time. 2/3 of the time, he apparently just set the text and added the punctuation, capitalization, and things like that as he went. And that's an astounding feat to do it that way. But about 1/3 of the time, apparently he had the time, he could in advance do it. And so he did. The other valuable aspect of this manuscript is that Joseph Smith used it for doing editorial changes, grammatical changes to the text of the Book of Mormon in the second edition in 1837. He went through the manuscript with a broad-nibbed ink pen and made grammatical corrections. The most common one was which to who. Our Father which art in heaven to our Father who art in heaven. And over 900 of these. And he marked most of them, about 700 and some, in the manuscript itself. They didn't set the 1837, though, from the printer's manuscript. They set it from an 1830 copy. So apparently what happened was, I think Oliver was working with Joseph, and Oliver marks up in 1830, and Joseph is marking up the printer's manuscript with these grammatical changes. And then they have the typesetter work off the 1830 that's got the corrections in it. Typesetter, when they get done with these copy texts, they throw them away. Never should, but they do. They've got printer's ink all over them. They're a mess. People think, oh, we don't need it anymore. We've typeset it. Of course, you didn't do it accurately, but you don't know that. You think you may have even proved it, but you think you've done it. So we throw them away. The first copy text we have is 1879. So that we haven't generally kept them. Okay. Next, this is the first page of the printer's manuscript. It's in Oliver Cowdery's hand, and we are missing the bottom 1 1/3 lines, and on the same side. They write on both sides of the paper, and it was apparently curling up, and people just kept hitting it. We have photographs, though, from 1923 that give a little bit more of the bottom part of this. And one of those, page 2, the opposite side, is reproduced in the volume here, so you can actually see a little bit more of it. The next one is a blown up version of the middle portion here, and I want to just point out a couple of things. Oliver is writing this from the original. We don't have the original for the first 2 pages of the original. It's not extant. But when he wrote the commencement of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah, he left out first year of the. His eyes skipped it, but he caught it when he proofed it, and he put it back. He put it in. So there it is. Here he started to write, repent of. We expect I repent of something, and it's not. And so he erases it with a smear, or I don't remember in this case whether he used a penknife. If you use the penknife, it'll scrape the paper, it'll affect the sizing, and in any event, he corrects this, and it's the great city, not that great city. So Oliver is struggling with copy. It turns out that going from the original to the printers, he will make about 3 changes per manuscript page. By a change, I mean any change in word or word form. If you delete an it's a change. It may not make any difference in meaning, but this is the struggle he will have. The 1830 typesetter makes about 3 changes per manuscript page. Most of them not important, but we'll do it. And when I made my transcript the first time, I made about 3 per manuscript page. And I was good. Okay, well, we also have here Joseph Smith. Here he is in that heavy ink making the correction. He's changing the grammar from to be to is. And we have one indication here of the printer putting a P in for new paragraph. He is going to determine the paragraphing, and he's going to determine the punctuation. The original manuscript basically doesn't have punctuation, and printers for the most part didn't originally either. Okay, next. This is the facsimile transcript, the one that I did. It's in the blue books that can be seen here, and in a facsimile transcript, we reproduce everything the way it's actually on the paper without interpretation. We let you think about it. So, but most of them destroyed. This is Oliver Cowdery, Prophets. This is how he spells it. We just put it that way. Sometimes you get something sort of weird like this, proping and fasting. The printer says proping and fasting. So we just put it there, and you can think about, is it praying and fasting? Prayer and fasting? Probing and fasting? Well, you have to think about this. It could be probing. Okay? In any event. So, John Gilbert, the typesetter, in one of his recollections said, after a few days, he asked permission to take the manuscript home so he could mark up the punctuation. We don't really have much marking in the printer's manuscript until we get to 2 Nephi, the Isaiah portions, and suddenly in 2 big areas we see it in black heavy ink. And I think this is when he did get permission to take it home. It would have been several weeks into the actual work. He didn't really quite remember that. And he took it home so he can do it in ink. Otherwise, he would do it in pencil if he's in the print shop. This is the procedure. You don't use ink right there on the manuscript in the shop. And this is Isaiah. It was very difficult for him to do the Isaiah. It's hard to punctuate it. And he also, though, he corrects a few things, like that. He sees that the King James is at, and he assumes correctly that a mistake was made. This is actually a mistake that probably occurred when the scribe heard Joseph Smith reading it off and misinterpreted at as that and wrote it wrong. And we see this isn't the original, but they copied it, and it looks like that's what it came from. Okay. 2 nights, apparently, he did it. It looks like. There wasn't much more that he actually did at home. Isaiah portions. Okay, next. This is a very interesting portion, the beginning of the book of Mosiah. And we're going to do the blow-up of the top part of this, so we'll see that. So, originally, Oliver wrote chapter 3. His copy had chapter 3. And then he realized, well, wait a minute, this is sort of the beginning of the book of Mosiah, and so he decides to make it chapter 1, and he crosses out the second stroke and the third. Another thing, though, that he does is he realizes there's no title here, so he shoves one in, inserts it. Well, it turns out this isn't the original beginning of the book of Mosiah. It's the 3rd chapter of the original. What happened to the 1st and 2nd chapters? Well, I think the 1st chapter and part of the 2nd was with the 116 pages. And when they lost the book of Lehi, they also lost the beginning of the book of Mosiah. One reason you can think of it this way is the book doesn't begin with a Mosiah. It should begin with Benjamin's father, Mosiah, but it's Benjamin. It should be the book of Benjamin. Other books do this, even if they change who's ever talking in the book. And it begins in the middle of things, and now there was no more contention in all the land. This is not a normal way to begin a book. There's no summary, no preface at the beginning. Other books that aren't written by Mormon and Moroni have typically this preface, unless they're a small book. So there's all these signs that this is, the book of Mosiah is cut off. And a couple of scholars have written also to argue that the last part of the words of Mormon actually are the last part of the 2nd chapter of the book of Mosiah. And that's in BYU Studies about December 2012, so you can go read about that. Okay. Well, these things, they're not innocent in a way. They're really telling us something quite dramatic about the book of Mosiah. Okay. And I already said all this. Okay, next. So this is a page that the Community of Christ, the RLDS, like to put on display because it shows all the people that worked on the printer's manuscript. So we have an unknown scribe too, a very good speller, it turns out. Then we have Hiram Smith, who took over for this unknown scribe. The unknown scribe does about 15% of the manuscript. And Hiram is taking over for him and just does little portions. This is one of the larger ones. Hiram has capital D's everywhere. And, said, done, had, everywhere. Just, he likes capital D's. He probably never learned little d's. And he's a very bad speller, and the typesetter is going through correcting his spelling. You can see that here. When he got here, he skipped a whole portion. Not that Hiram is guilty, only Hiram's guilty of this. We all do it. Your eye skips as you're going from one manuscript back and forth. And so Oliver proofing it, they are proofing this, puts it in. And we have Joseph Smith. Look at which to who, which to who, was to were, which to who. 2 of them. I mean, he is marking up the manuscript with these grammatical corrections. Okay. This is, we know when this page was written. And we'll look at the top of it right here. So the next one. So you will notice, well, on November the 6th, I believe it was, 6th, is that right? 1829, Oliver wrote a letter to Joseph saying, we have gotten to the commandment of Alma to his sons. I think he wrote it that way in the letter. He put commandment in the singular. And he quit for the day. And you can see what he did here. He wrote the word chapter. Let's see, this thing going to show. Wrong. Okay, now we get there we go. Okay, so he wrote the word chapter, the commandment of Alma, no S. Later, he starts ruling this page in blue ink, and he comes in and he's checking his original and says, oh, it's plural. So he puts the S in, and he puts the chapter number. This means chapter numbers aren't original. And when we look at the original manuscript and portions of the printers, we see this sort of thing going on. That Oliver, or Joseph told Oliver when he got to some kind of break, write chapter. It's a new chapter. And then just went on, and then later they go in and put the numbers. In fact, if you go back to that previous one, where Hiram wrote the chapter number, he wrote the wrong one. He's got 14th, and the typesetter goes in and puts 13. We'll go back. There it is. There's 14th, and the typesetter puts a 3 in pencil, because he's counting better. But you know, this happens. If there's no numbers, you got to count. You might get off. And they did. Okay, we'll go back to this. So, chapter, what this means is the word chapter is not in the Book of Mormon text. It's Joseph Smith's addition to it. And then the numbers are being added. And this is why it needs to be in color. Because I originally saw this in black and white, and I had no idea. When I saw the actual piece of paper, I was just astounded. It was pounding away. Okay. So, but also we see the S being added. He's proofing it, and so forth. Okay. So this shows what happens to a typical page, a leaf, when or in a gathering. They would typically have 6 big sheets. They'd be folded. They'd be lined. They would write the text on them. When they were done, they would put stab holes down the fold and thread and tie it and take it in. And the typesetter, when he gets it, apparently would just cut it up. Cut it. Maybe more than one person would be setting type. Maybe someone has set type and they want someone to proof a part of it that's already been set. And we see it here. So they really slashed along here. Sometimes they get some of the text cut. And then this was cut. And later it was put together with pins. And you can see the stain from the pin. And it was up here. See, there it is. This was crooked. And it was pinned. And it was that way until about 1900. When they finally took out the pins and sort of put it together. Okay. But okay, go back. Well, okay, there we are. From Helaman 13 to the end of Mormon, there are 4 gatherings, and they never made it into the print shop. There's no marks by the typesetter. They are left, and here are the stains from the yarn that was in there until about 1900, apparently. And so, what happened? Well, they took in the original, because we have fragments of the original, and we can see the punctuation marks and things like that, and we say, well, they're taking in the original. Why? Well, for 20 years, I believe, the only thing I could think of was they fell behind in their copy work, and so they did a little sneaky thing and just took in the original. Well, I don't think that, myself, I don't think that happened. I think now that there's a different story, so we'll look at that. And maybe it's on, I think, the next slide. Okay. So, my original theory that I held was they fell behind in the copy work, but I now believe what happened was that, and this is a well-known story in Mormondom, that Joseph Smith supposedly decided to sell the copyright, sell the Book of Mormon in Canada or something, tried to. He didn't. What he wanted to do, apparently, was to secure a copyright for the Book of Mormon to protect it in the British realm, because the American copyright was only in the United States. I think the motivation for this was a guy named Abner Cole, who was publishing. He'd published first Nephi, a couple portions, then he did part of Alma, and the brethren caught him. And Joseph Smith had to come up and exercise his copyright. And maybe this guy said, oh, well, you can do this. I'm going to Canada. I'll go to Canada. It's 100 miles away, and I'll just publish it there. I don't know that I'm supposing, but there is evidence from David Whitmer saying that Hiram suggested they take the printer's manuscript to Canada, and I think they completed it very quickly in January and took it up to Canada to try. They crossed the lake with ice and everything, and spent a month up there. Oliver, Hiram Page, and two other brethren. I think you have the names now or something in the book. Somewhere. Anyway, it's in the book. I think it is. So, they really tried to protect it. They couldn't get a printer to accept it, to do it, so they came back. There never was really a problem. It ended up that way. But, so, they take in, they've got 2 copies now completed. They take the printers to Canada, they have the original, they take that into the printer. They never tell the printer said, I think there's only one. Later in his life, there were 2 copies. No, there's only 1 copy. But he set from the original. Okay, so here's the last page of Mormon. The Book of Mormon within the Book of Mormon, and done in this scribe 2. He was doubling up, and he just leaves this blank. They don't do this anywhere else because they're poor. Paper, remember Joseph Knight Sr. had to go buy them paper, and they didn't have the money, and so they're not going to do this normally. But the reason they do this is that Oliver had jumped ahead to the Book of Ether and copied it. So it was already done. And so there's no reason to copy it again. So even a blank, nearly a blank page is important. It means something. It tells us something. Okay. This is George Schweik, the grandson of David Whitmer, who had the manuscript. Oliver had it after the printing of the 37 edition. And when he left the church, he had the manuscript in his possession, took it with him. When he dies in 1850, he wills it to David Whitmer, who keeps it. And I think Robin will tell some interesting stories about that. And when he died in 1888, then the grandson, George Schweik, gets it and ultimately sells it to the reorganized Latter-day Saint Church. And 1903, and so here's George Schweik. And the next one. This is the big black and white copy I used for a couple years making my transcript, and another person working with me. And there's an actual 1830, so it's really big and hefty. And the next, this is the manuscript as it originally was in its gatherings, and all piled up here. And the 2. This is the title page. It's actually the copyright statement, and underneath it's the 1830 preface. They're each on separate sheets. They're that way in your book, and then you'll get the actual manuscript. Okay. Here I am in the early 90s, back checking my transcript against the actual manuscript. I innocently asked the RLDS Church, I want to check my transcript against the actual manuscript. And according to Ron Romey, this caused sort of an emergency, and no one had ever asked to actually study the manuscript, except when they did their 1908 edition, but that was their own Scriptures Committee. And but they took it out of the bank vault that they had it in Kansas City, and and allowed me to work on it for 2 weeks. I was going to do it 1 week and I ran out of time, so I got an extra week. And finally, at the end, I had to have a chess clock and allow myself 7 minutes per page. So obviously I was cutting corners. And but anyway, that was a great experience working with the actual manuscript. There's the transcript, there's the manuscript in its original form. It would be 6 sheets folded, 24 pages. Okay, next. This is my brother, now deceased, Nevin Skousen, a photographer. He went back a year later with me, and we got permission to photograph it in color. This is the first time the manuscript's been photographed in color, because I knew I wanted color. And so he did that, and we made 2 prints of it. I have one, and the Community of Christ has the other. And then I went back a year later, and this is really an astounding event. Complete cooperation between the LDS Church, the RLDS Church, and me as the guy doing the textual criticism. I wanted to check the paper, the actual physical paper of the 2 manuscripts. Are they the same or different? Is there any? So I brought fragments from the Wilford Wood, little bits of fragments from the Wilford Wood collection. They have 2% of the text of the original. The church sent Rick Turley and the church historian, and they brought fragments from the original manuscript to Independence. And the Community of Christ had their fragments. So we're all there together comparing these fragments. It turns out there's no overlap. But we did it. And it's sort of an amazing kind. There's Ron Romey, the archivist. There's my beautiful wife. There's me. This is Robert Espinoza, head of conservation at BYU Library, a Catholic. So we are really ecumenical here. Okay. And there's another picture. So, the next one we have in the late 90s, our church decided to conserve the printer's manuscript because it was deteriorating. When I would use it, little bits would just fall off of the and you know, something had to be done. And our church, they brought it to Salt Lake, and it's washed. And here it is in water, and the ink is staying on the paper. That's important. And they tested it first, you know, a little bit. And then the next one, when they're done, it's encapsulated in Mylar. And this is 1 sheet of Mylar, so you can't fold it anymore. So the manuscript is not the same as it was. You can't have these 6 large sheets folded as they had been. So they're all laying flat, they're sort of out of order, you have to sort of hunt for the next page and so forth. But the text is all there, and it's been preserved, and you know, we don't have the acids building up and eating away and deteriorating. So this is a very important thing. And it's been pointed out that this press conference is supposedly the first official press conferences between both churches simultaneously. It's good. It's good. Okay, I'll turn it over. Oh, yes. Sorry.
Okay, appreciate Royal's remarks. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history. We provide in the volume a historical introduction to the printer's manuscript, and I find that I come home sometimes and I'm really excited to tell my wife about this discovery I made in the manuscript. I say, guess what? I found a pinhole, and that means that something's been connected to the text, and it's so exciting. Isn't this so exciting? And my wife says, no, that's not exciting at all. You need to calm down. This is really nerdy. So I've found that telling really interesting stories that I find really interesting doesn't necessarily translate to my audience. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the stories of the translation, publication of the Book of Mormon. I do this kind of I've been thinking a little bit lately about historians and how they've talked about the past. The Book of Mormon has not always been, well, I guess it still isn't. The Book of Mormon is fraught territory for historians. In the past, historians would say, aha, I found this source that proves that the Book of Mormon is false. And another historian would say, wait, no, what about this source? This proves that the Book of Mormon is true. And it's just kind of been this battle back and forth of people trying to prove or disprove the Book of Mormon. I don't find that very interesting, historically speaking. What I find actually quite interesting is how the Book of Mormon affected the individuals involved. So Joseph Smith, I think, gets a lot of credit, rightly so, obviously, for producing the Book of Mormon. But I'm more interested in other individuals. What did other people think about the Book of Mormon? How did they react to the Book of Mormon? So I titled this presentation, The Witnesses to the Coming Forth of the Book of Mormon. The witnesses, that's kind of a loaded term. When we think of witnesses to the Book of Mormon, we think of 3 and 8 witnesses, the official, formal witnesses. I think more broadly than that. Anyone who was part of Joseph Smith's early community of believers was a witness. Anyone who was acquainted with Joseph and tried to discredit him, they were a witness to the events of the Book of Mormon. All of these individuals influenced the way the Book of Mormon was treated and understood by the community at the time. And I'm interested in their story. I'm interested in how these individuals approach the Book of Mormon. So, we've talked about that. We don't need to, this is the volume. Let's see. So I've broken, actually I'm not going to, I'll just see if this works here. So, I've broken up I'm going to talk a few stories, a few anecdotes. And as I look at the Book of Mormon, I break it up into a few periods. You could do it other ways, but this is how I do it. We have the pre-translation, in other words, before Joseph Smith is actually actively working with a scribe to produce the Book of Mormon. The translation itself, the publication, which I think is important. And then when we look at the manuscripts, I'm also quite interested, obviously, in the life of the manuscript after its initial use was done. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these eras. Okay, Joseph Smith in 1838 and 39 begins to tell his story in detail. There are other earlier histories, other attempts to tell his story. But in 1838 and 1839, Joseph Smith seriously writes his story. It's very detailed. This is where we have eventually the history of the church, the manuscript history, which was published by B.H. Roberts, is the history of the church. When Joseph Smith talks about that first night of seeing Moroni, I've shown a picture here that's misleading. I'm talking about before Joseph Smith claims to have received the plates. I'm talking about 1823 when he first sees the angel. When Joseph Smith tells this story, he talks about 2 individuals that I find interesting. The juxtaposition of these 2 individuals. The first individual was this angel, later known as Moroni. This angel was interpreted by Joseph Smith, and the rhetoric surrounding this angel was all about the miraculous nature of the Book of Mormon. Had Joseph Smith simply found golden plates, he would have been like a lot of other people who found interesting objects in the ground in early America. But the angel made it, couched it in the divine, made it a miraculous story. So for Joseph, Angel Moroni was an important part of that story in showing the sacredness of the Book of Mormon. For others, of course, Moroni became this other interpretation. There's a lot of interpretations of Moroni, all the way from angel, as Joseph Smith talks about, to treasure guardian, as others have said. But I think that the angel has couched the Book of Mormon plates in a supernatural, in a divine story. The other individual that Joseph Smith talks about is his father, Joseph Smith Sr. Of course, according to Joseph, he sees the angel 3 times in the night. The next morning, he's exhausted. He goes into work in the farm. His father sees how exhausted he is, sends him home. On the way home, Joseph collapses, has another vision with this angel. And the angel says, "Go tell your father." And the father says, "You need to do what the angel says." Now, to me, that's almost a passing reference to his father. But I think that Joseph Jr. is very deliberate in talking about his father. I think that the juxtaposition, as I said, between the angel and Joseph Smith Sr. is a very important one. Joseph Smith would not have been where he was without couching the Book of Mormon in a religious setting. But Joseph Smith also would not have been where he was without the support of his family. He had a tremendous support system in the Smith family. Joseph Smith Sr., Lucy Mack Smith, his siblings. I think that we take for granted, we as historians, those that are members, others who observe the life of Joseph Smith, they take for granted the support system that Joseph Smith had in his family. And I think it's important to remember that. And I think it's important to remember that Joseph Smith talks about that. He remembers his family fondly. And then, of course, there's another individual, that Lucy Mack Smith. We have this wonderful memoir from Lucy Mack Smith. We wouldn't know a lot of the events of the early restoration without Joseph's mother. Talking about Alvin Smith. So this, I'm not going to have enough time. That is the gravestone of Alvin. This is a dedicatory page. The manuscript history was dedicated to the memory of Alvin, which of course has a lot of meaning. Joseph Smith is fond of his brother, recalls many wonderful memories of Alvin. Well, according to Lucy, on Alvin Smith's deathbed, he counsels Joseph to do everything he can to obtain the record. For Lucy, she also understood that the Smith family was this important support system for Joseph. And as we, historians, as we look at the events of the Restoration, we need to remember that so many of those events were, so often the sources come to us in the miraculous. We can't look at early Mormonism without confronting stories of ancient plates and angels and whatnot. But in looking at the social history, the day-to-day materiality and events of Joseph Smith, we need to remember that he was also interacting with his family and others who either supported or did not support him. Okay, let's talk about the translation a bit. Oliver Cowdery rightly gets much of the credit for providing services as scribe. Emma, I think, gets short shrift for her effort. We remember, of course, Emma. I think Emma in the last 20 years, her reputation has, people have tried to recover her reputation, try to make her sometimes greater than life, but certainly a supportive spouse and one who supported Joseph Smith. For the most part, I think that that's accurate. Emma Smith left later witness statements to the translation. We have kind of an understanding of the translation process through statements by Emma. But I think what we sometimes forget is Emma as a witness to the events and as an active participant. And I'm of course talking about her role as scribe. She served as scribe to Joseph Smith. She and Martin Harris worked on that early portion of the manuscript. This was all done while Emma was expecting their first child. Again, we forget sometimes how these different events overlap. So, Emma's pregnant. She's working with Joseph Smith as a scribe, very likely cooking his and Martin Harris's dinner, cleaning up after them, doing a lot of the housework. Joseph is not able to do as much work as most husbands would at the time. So Emma is doing all this work while pregnant, delivers the child, and it's essentially stillbirth. The child dies, and there's this tremendous loss. And as I, as a historian, look at this, I realize we have virtually nothing about this episode. We don't understand how Joseph and Emma are feeling at this time. When we think of Joseph at this time. We think about him working on the translation. We think about him kind of this proto-institutional church, but we forget that he's also this new husband and father very briefly, and then with the loss of this child. So they lose the child. Emma is on her deathbed. She's very ill, according to all accounts. Joseph stays with Emma for a while, but Emma finally tells Joseph to go up to Palmyra. Why does she want him to go up to Palmyra? Well, they're both on the edge of their seats trying to figure out what happened to Martin Harris. Martin Harris had gone up with the manuscript, and they had not heard word. They didn't know what had happened. So Joseph goes up, already grief-stricken. He finds that the manuscript is lost. Martin Harris lost it. It was stolen or destroyed or whatever. And so this double whammy, essentially, of grief for Joseph, and I think, again, importantly, for Emma. And so as a historian, as I look at Emma as a witness, I realize that not all of the witnesses left paper trails that we would like to see. When we look at Martin Harris, we find certain revelations dictated to him. When we look at Oliver Cowdery, there's several revelations dictated to Joseph Smith, or to Martin Harris, or Oliver Cowdery. I want to know where the revelation is dictated to Emma Smith, giving her comfort for the loss of their child. Where's the revelation given to both Joseph and Emma that comforts them in their time of sorrow? We don't have it. It doesn't exist. Whether it was even given is speculation. I think maybe it was, but it certainly wasn't committed to paper. And for me, as I look at that as a historian, it helps me remember that she was a witness for what could have been, what wasn't documented, what doesn't exist for us to recover. So when we look at the witnesses of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, I like to remember that there are a lot of events, a lot of individuals who never documented their efforts, never documented their sacrifices, never documented their thoughts and feelings, which I think is an important thing to remember. Okay, let's talk about the publication. Royal talked about Gilbert punctuating essentially the entire Book of Mormon. I think this is important. I would call Gilbert maybe a reluctant witness. No, reluctant's not right, because he was very willing to be a witness later in his life. He was quite proud of his efforts. He often bragged that he typeset the entire Book of Mormon. He was certainly, though, an unbelieving witness. He was part of this group of individuals who left statements that tried to discredit Joseph Smith in one way or another. But when we look at their story, we also have to remember that the Book of Mormon influenced and impacted their lives as well. Joseph's neighbors, who never believed him, were still influenced by Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. And so when we look at the witnesses of the Book of Mormon, we need to remember that it's not the faithful witnesses that we're interested in, or at least as a historian, I'm not only interested in the faithful witnesses. I'm interested in the community that was surrounding Joseph Smith, both pro and con. Because if Joseph Smith was only surrounded by supportive individuals, then the story of the restoration would be completely different, right? So what does John Gilbert tell us? What do we learn from him? I think that one of the, if I were to take off my historian hat and put on my Sunday school teacher hat or whatever, I think John Gilbert has a lot to offer us. Some scholars think that you have to be a believing Latter-day Saint to write about the Book of Mormon. You have to accept the truth claims of the Book of Mormon to be able to offer anything new or fresh or exciting about the Book of Mormon. But I look at John Gilbert and I think, here we have a non-believer who's essentially helping us navigate the text. Punctuation is an important but subtle way of approaching a text, and particularly 19th century punctuation. Gilbert choosing a period over a semicolon, over a comma, over a dash, or parenthetical, all of these have subtle ways of helping us navigate the text. And so when a non-Mormon helps us see the text in a different light, I'm grateful for that. I think that there's some importance there. And so when we look at these non-believing witnesses, I think they have a lot to offer us in understanding the history of the Book of Mormon. Okay, and there we have Mr. Gilbert there, holding a folded up Book of Mormon. He, like I said, he was proud of the effort, though not a believer of the Book of Mormon. Okay, so the post-publication life of the manuscripts, as Royal talks about, this is a page from the journal, and you probably can't read it, but this is a list. The following articles were deposited therein by President Smith, therein meaning the cornerstone, and it's the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon. Now, I can say with confidence that if you want to preserve a manuscript, you should not deposit it in a cornerstone that's only feet away from the Mississippi River. It's not a good idea. But I see this as the manuscripts themselves are witnesses to the restoration, witnesses to the history. And why do I say that? I think Joseph Smith placed a lot of symbolism in the manuscripts themselves. Joseph Smith, when he deposited this in the cornerstone, said something along the lines of, "This has given me trouble enough." Now, I've wondered what exactly that means, but I think one interpretation is the Book of Mormon manuscript symbolized to Joseph Smith the beginning of his prophetic career. And the beginning of his prophetic career began a lot of problems, a lot of persecution, a lot of difficulties, a lot of heartache. And so, for whatever reason, he decided to deposit that in the cornerstone as an act of treating it maybe as a relic, treating it certainly with symbolism. And I think when we look at these artifacts, when we look at these manuscripts, not just as texts, but as artifacts, as symbols, we can see how each generation has treated these documents. I think there's a lot of power in that. Here we have good old Brother Whitmer, David Whitmer, who's looking really happy to have his picture taken. Oliver Cowdery ended up with the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon. Upon his death in 1850, he gave the manuscript to David Whitmer. David Whitmer saw this as a sacred calling. He was going to protect the manuscript. He had many people, on several instances, people tried to purchase the manuscript from David Whitmer, and he would have none of it. Didn't matter the cost, didn't matter anything. He would not sell the printer's manuscript. David Whitmer often told how a tornado ripped through Richmond, Missouri, where he was living. It tore the roof off his house completely, damaged his house except for the room where the manuscript was stored. He told this on one occasion to George Buchanan, and they both, despite their religious differences, they both believed that God had certainly preserved the manuscript. So when we again see this manuscript as a symbol, as a artifact in the history of the Restoration, and how each generation and each individual looked at these artifacts, we get a sense of how the Book of Mormon influenced individuals. One final story. David Whitmer, in showing the manuscript to individuals, often pointed to the yarn. Royal talked about the yarn and the string that had connected some of these pages. He pointed to the yarn, and he said, "That's my mother's yarn." And I find that this is important. For David Whitmer, the printer's manuscript was not only a religious artifact, it was a family artifact. When he pointed to Mary Musselman Whitmer's string, he saw in that string a sacrifice by his mother, a contribution for the Whitmer family to preserve the manuscript. For David Whitmer, who did not go out west with Brigham Young, didn't follow the RLDS church, he was marching to his own beat of the drum. He believed in the Book of Mormon. He saw spiritual strength in the Book of Mormon, and he saw a family connection. He saw his mother working on the manuscript, helping to preserve the manuscript. He was preserving the manuscript. The manuscript was going to go to his children to preserve. For me, as I look at these witnesses to the Book of Mormon, I see a variety of voices and a variety of experiences, running from a strong testimony to disbelieving in the Book of Mormon. And I find a community influenced by the Book of Mormon. And as I look at that, I think to myself, maybe we today can also find a varied degree of experiences with the Book of Mormon. Can someone who doesn't believe that the Book of Mormon is historically driven teach me something about the Book of Mormon? Yeah, I think so. Can someone who wants to disprove Joseph Smith as what he claimed himself to be tell me something about the history of Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon? Yes. We have today still this text, this very important text that has arguably founded a world religion, and all of that that's come with that. And it's a powerful symbol. It's a powerful symbol, both pro and con, and I find real strength in that. I find that the Book of Mormon really is an important text because it has created a community, it has created a group of individuals who are in some way or another impacted by that text. Thank you very much.
This is totally tangential, but what kind of studies have you done on the yarn and the string itself?
So the question was, what kinds of studies have we done on the yarn or the string? I haven't done much, actually. I'm not an expert in textiles of the 19th century. We have this is probably where I admit that I've deceived you just slightly. This is actually yarn from the original Book of Mormon, not from the printer's manuscript. But we do have textile experts at the church that have looked at this a bit, but there's a lot more questions I have because we don't know for sure how this string or yarn was made. It could have been homespun, which was very common at the time. It could have been purchased at a store.
Do you know the material?
As far as we know, it is wool, but I'm told that you can find out quite a bit. You can find out what kind of sheep they come from and amazing CSI kind of stuff that is beyond me, but I would love to have someone do a little bit more about it.
The Mystery of Scribe 2. Would it make a good Hardy Boys book?
Possibly. The kind of Hardy Boy book that I would love to read, but Royal, do you want to talk a bit about Scribe 2?
Well, I don't know. The current book that JSP has put out claims it's not Martin Harris. Now, I didn't know you had good handwriting samples of Martin Harris, but beyond signatures.
There are a few handwriting samples of Martin Harris, but not enough to be, in my opinion, completely definitive.
Yeah. Well, whoever it is, I've been arguing it's probably not a Whitmer and not a Smith, because the spelling's too good. And when I've been going through the spelling in the manuscripts, this will be in part 4 of volume 3, the two Whitmers and Hiram are both third-rate spellers. This means they make egregious errors. Oliver Cowdery is a second-rate speller. He makes a lot of errors, but they tend to be ones that you might expect. Very often when I go through a word and it's misspelled by Oliver, and I go through his various misspellings, and then I turn to Scribe 2 of the printer's manuscript, I have the statement, no mistakes made by the Scribe 2. The word is always spelled correctly. This happens over and over. Now, in a few places, Scribe 2 does some bizarre things, but otherwise, good speller. So this is showing something beyond, I think, the Whitmer family and the Smith family as farmers. So, you know, we're right now, I think there's a section of the Doctrine and Covenants written in the hand of this scribe. Is that not right?
That's the unknown scribe from the original.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Well, we know who they are now, don't we, pretty much?
Possibly, yeah.
So
Well,
do
I mean, John Whitmer is
John
probably
Whitmer is
Scribe 2 pretty much.
Pretty clear.
And
The other
Scribe
one
3, I
Christian.
think, is Christian Whitmer. The dotted I's, all the lowercase minuscules agree in his signature. But we only have 2 signatures, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't like to base it on signatures, you know. So, ultimately, as far as the text goes, it's not important. You know, we like to know these things, but as far as the actual text goes, you know, he wrote what he wrote. I don't think it's a she, but, you know, I think Emma is the only female that we have any account of anyone claiming to be a scribe of that gender.
Was Scribe 2 in Harmony or up the Whitmer?
Well, the printer's manuscript is being done all up there, you know, near Palmyra. The whole thing. So nothing's being done in Susquehanna on that. The original manuscript, of course, starts out basically with Martin Harris and the 116 and Emma, and a couple of other people. Samuel Smith is supposed to have done some of the original, and the brother of Emma, Reuben. And there's something very interesting. It's in the Maroon books, but in Mosiah 29, suddenly Oliver, when he's trying to copy the original, we don't have the original, he makes some very weird errors, which seem to indicate he's trying to copy someone that's causing him trouble. And that could either be Reuben or it could be, I think it's actually Samuel Smith, but I don't know. We're just speculating. But there's somebody there writing that's really causing him trouble. He's not used to it. And then it only lasts for about a chapter. So we also have Joseph Smith in the original for 28 words. This has caused huge speculation in Alma 45, but it is not Oliver Cowdery translating. It looks like Oliver Cowdery was falling asleep. 4 lines earlier, he writes rubbish. It's the only time he writes rubbish. It just doesn't make any sense. And for the only word ever for Oliver, the hand just goes like this. 4 lines later, Joseph Smith takes over and does 28 words. And I think what happened was Joseph was viewing something and he's got to copy it. He can't let it just go because when he comes back, the instrument will have moved on. So he's got to copy it. And Oliver is taking a coffee break, I think we could say that. Well, anyway. It is interesting about the scribes, I say, but nonetheless, the text is everything, in my opinion. Okay.
Can you tell us anything about the translation process?
Well, too much. I'm writing whole things about it, and there's huge debates about it. So,
In a nutshell, Roy.
well, I will tell you my opinion. My opinion is Joseph Smith saw words of English, and he read them off. B.H. Roberts never liked that view. He said it was too easy. But B.H. Roberts never got a revelation that way either. I don't think any of us have either. But I think that's what happened, and there's considerable evidence that this translation is something special and it's controlled. And so that's what I've been arguing for, and you can go read or see various things on YouTube and talks I've given about that subject. And there are other viewpoints, you know, each to their own.
Including me, I have slightly different views. So.
Yeah.
Amen at this point.
Well, yeah, let me say something. It's been interesting to see the discussion online recently about translation. Everyone, it seems, not everyone of course, but it seems like the direction is to try to say this is exactly how the translation process happened. And I want to be a bit more flexible. I want to be a bit more open and complicate it a bit more. I want to allow for Joseph Smith to develop in his learning. I want to allow for Joseph to learn and grow. So Joseph Smith copying characters from the plates and sending those to Charles Anthon via Martin Harris. I would argue that that's part of the translation, that's Joseph Smith engaging with the text, trying to understand the text. Joseph Smith using the interpreters, using the seer stone, other ways, that maybe there are other ways in which Joseph Smith is translating. I want to allow for multiple interpretations so that we don't always say that it had to be a certain way.
I'm
Yes.
I saw that on your face.
So-
I saw that coming.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people out there talking about how this translation is supposed to occur, but they're not looking at the evidence. The evidence is the text and the manuscripts. So, for instance, we look at the meaning of the words, we find that the meaning of the words are from 1540 to 1730s. The meanings. They're in the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. Now, there are a lot of people that don't like this idea. You may not like it. And they just say, oh, well, it's upstate New York relic dialect that Joseph Smith got. Well, very good. Why don't you go and try and find it? Because there's only two people that have been trying to find it, me and Stan Carmack.
Yeah.
Nobody else is trying to find it. And I believe in evidence. I think we got to go look for evidence. You can speculate all day long about how Joseph Smith translated and stuff, but I want to look at the actual evidence of the text and the manuscripts and what they're saying. And I've been putting it in print, and I've been putting it on YouTube, and I suggest you go look at it, and you can read what other people, you'll see they don't have any evidence. They're just thinking off the top of their heads. Okay, well, I've said my... Okay, that's fine.
Let's see. Gary in the back.
This is a question about the punctuation. So it was Gilbert who did the punctuation?
Yeah, as far as we can tell, you know, he doesn't sign every little one, but it all looks sort of the same. And, you know, when he's in the shop, it's in pencil. And Oliver did some before when he did the printer's manuscript, he starts doing some. Because he knows the printer needs it, and the printer just ignored him. So Oliver stopped doing it.
This is a two-part question then about that. Based on what you've, on your studies, Gilbert took the punctuation very seriously, and it reflects a pretty good understanding of punctuation.
Yes, I would say that, you know, over 95% more of, we essentially have Gilbert's punctuation. We essentially have Gilbert's punctuation.
Okay.
And it works pretty much. There have been a few that have been changed because he got them wrong, and there's still some that are wrong, but, you know, we struggle with that.
So about what percentage of his punctuation survives in the text today?
Oh, well, I'd say over 95%. I haven't ever calculated, but, you know, a semicolon is still a period. I don't care about that kind of stuff. But a comma going to a period is something different. So, but I've never calculated it.
If you say the translation was a tight one, and I've read your articles and been to workshops, then we're assuming that somebody who lived in England in the 16th century learned Reformed Egyptian in the spirit world and dictated those sentences to Joseph Smith with the seer stone. Now, did that person also learn 19th century English to account for the 19th century evangelical Christian words and phrases in the Book of Mormon?
Well, I don't think the latter really exists there. Oh,
They can't hear back there.
well, I don't know that I can repeat it.
Summarize.
Well, he's wondering how you can get all this mixture of Hebraisms and this early, you know, this early English that I'm promoting. and he claims that there might be some dialectal stuff too. We're finding that virtually all the dialectal stuff can be put into the early modern English, so that's becoming rather moot. But it's very tempting to try and speculate as to how this text was created. And I myself have participated in it, and I've stopped, because it doesn't do any good. It doesn't do any good to talk about whether the Lord did it, or he has a committee. Now don't quote me. That people started saying Skousen says that William Tyndale was on the committee. You know, that was made up totally. I've never, because Tyndale dies in the 1530s, so he can't even be on the committee. Okay, you can do this, and it doesn't get you anywhere. It just diverts you from studying the text. And I've been studying the text. There's one thing I really found interesting. I think we should leave this topic, but I want to point this out. You know, if you suppose that this text was created by somebody that knew early modern English and just sat down and wrote it, and then they waited for Joseph Smith, you know, to come around. If you go pick up a 15 or 1600 book and start reading it, every other sentence is going to have some word you don't even know. And Stan Carmack and I were doing this. We were reading through Hartsfield's story of Sir Thomas More, and we kept having to go to the Oxford English Dictionary to look up these words. We didn't know what they meant. But you look at the Book of Mormon, even though there are these archaic word uses and stuff, every word is still in English. And I came to the conclusion that it was a managed text. That even though it has all these archaic elements and so forth, it was managed so that when Joseph Smith dictates it, the scribe understands the words. Can write them down, unless it's Neos. Something weird, you know, and then they'll deal with those, you know, the weird animals, those kind of things. Well, that's, to me, it implies that there's control over this text, and it isn't something that just prepared earlier and just waiting. It's being prepared for Joseph Smith and his scribe. But it's different, it's something different. I recommend that instead of speculating, that we go study the actual text, the words, and what they tell us. And it's not easy. It's not easy.
Back here, I had.
Oh, yes.
Okay, now we look at Moroni 10:4 about. What are you saying?
No, I'm just telling them to repeat your question because they won't be
All
hearing
right,
you back.
all right.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, you do a lot of investigative historical work, and you now, at some point, you threw out speculation, and I'm wondering if that was a spiritual happening, like we look at Moroni 10:4. If you read these things, if it be wisdom in God that you read them, by the power of the Holy Ghost, you may know the truthfulness of all things. So did you prayerfully seek guidance from the Lord in your investigative process, is my question.
Specifically, no.
No.
No, I don't. I don't think I should.
Why not?
Well, I think the work I do is academic and scholarly. And what good's it going to do me if I get the Lord says, that's the wrong reading, do this one. What
Well,
good's it for the
says
Lord?
the truthfulness of all things through the Holy Ghost. Why would you throw that out?
Well, if the Lord wants to tell me, I'll listen.
Well, you have to ask him.
Well, no, then I'm not.
Okay,
I'm not.
all right,
It's
you
not
answered
within
my
my.
question.
I don't think I should be
You answered
asking
my
what the
question.
true text is, and I don't think it would be good
I didn't
for it.
ask you that. I asked you if your historical search.
No, I
included
won't.
prayer.
I
And you
won't.
said no. Okay.
I pray the Lord will help me, and I will look in the right places and all that. But I don't ask. It isn't even for me to ask. to get a revealed text. And I don't think I'll ever get it, but I'm not going to ask. And I guess if I don't ask, I won't get it. Okay. So I turn it back to the
Maybe
historian.
one more, we've got to wrap it up.
Yes, we do have to ask.
Yes, in the back.
What is the source of the original Book of Mormon? What's the provenance? Where does it come from? You mentioned 2% from Wilford Wood. And when is that volume going to be published? Just tell us about where you find it and whether you think there's other pages out there still.
Well, it's basically here, the original manuscript, 28%, and we're not finding any more fragments out there. There's probably 2 leaves that that Bideman gave out, First Nephi and the pages 23 and 24, because they would have been, they just, somebody had them. And there's probably half a leaf that the Summerhays family had from 1 Nephi 14. Somebody's got that, it looks like. A member of the family has got it and sort of put it away. It probably got thrown away. There was, we pretty well have, Mark Hoffman created quite a few fragments for us. We run across those. We have to get rid of those. Yeah, he still causing trouble. So, but
Okay, one last thing, the elephant in the room, just real brief comment on this here stone. Okay?
he's not permitted to answer. He's been given instructions not to answer. But you go ahead and answer.
Here's my answer. It's a very pretty picture, isn't it? No, it's very refreshing to have it out there for scholars to look at. I think that it's an amazing, as has been mentioned quite a bit online, I think that I see it as a representative of the church's continued transparency in trying to show this material for scholars and other members. I think it's great. I like that it's there. I like that it's in our volume. That's kind of nice. But as far as like the behind the scenes, I was not part of that discussion. That's a little bit above my pay grade.
Well, I think it's great that the church is, changing the way it presents how the book was translated. Because the church art has shown, as far as we can tell, usually 2 different ways that we know there's no support for. Joseph sitting at a table with the plates already in view, with his finger on them, and the scribe Oliver across the table. Never happened. And Oliver on the other side of a curtain, and Joseph translating. There's no evidence for that one either. But in the church statement of, I think now a couple years ago, they specifically quote Elder Nelson and Elder Maxwell as saying that there was indeed a seer stone placed in a hat. That was the majority of the translation of the text, which I think is correct. By putting the photograph in, the church is adding support to what the witnesses, 6 really good bona fide witnesses, claim the way the translation seems to have taken place. From the 116 pages up to the Whitmers at the end. I think it's great. That's what it's valuable for. And, okay.
Sorry. Thank you so much. Sorry, I know we could ask questions all night. We've already gone longer than we typically do, but I think the mood in the room was such that you wanted to pursue it. So if we could now ask you to please put